How sweet. You have fun. You didn't bring your flowers?
Drop the ball.
Showing you up.
I can't compete with you guys' flowers anyways.
Peace.
Last, make sure that you signed in.
Yeah.
Do I need to sign in?
No.
Okay.
So feel free to begin whenever you are ready.
Hello, my name is Allison Goodsby, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about fashion bloggers' Instagram aesthetic and how we can approach this conversation with a Christian worldview. So I just want to start by asking a simple question, and you can raise your hand to answer yes, but how many of you in this room actually have an active Instagram account that you use? Okay, so I'll say 97% because of our two professors. But quite a few of us, the majority of us in this room actually use the platform. So now to take it a step further, how many of you follow at least one fashion account? Okay, so again, even the men want to raise their hand, that's fine, I'm not judging. So this is a huge majority of the people who are on this platform in general, so this topic is incredibly relevant. So I just want to talk about how public relations professionals are super motivated to talk about this topic because it's so relevant in our field. My personal experience in social media management has been a key motivator in my interest in fashion bloggers and Instagram presentation of the self. So if you're not familiar with this term, it's basically just like it sounds. It's how someone presents themselves. So this could be when they get their picture taken, how they pose, or when they meet a new person, the information they offer up, or it can even be translated for social media platforms and how they present themselves on there. So my experience in social media and public relations as an industry was shifted to emphasize blogging when I became the social media team lead for a blog named Grace Bell in Orange County. So I got this job last year, and it's still currently my job right now, and I've been opened up through this position to the world of fashion blogging. Now, Grace Bell isn't a fashion blog in particular. We more focus on a broad lifestyle and community platform. However, we interact with fashion bloggers almost daily. And so I thought that it would be super relevant to bring this conversation in light of my experience. So through Grace Bell, we are centered around 4 personas, and that is the creative, the adventurer, the sweetheart, and the fashionista. Through these personas, we encourage young women to live life beautifully by expressing themselves. With this job, I have gone from a mere spectator of my favorite blogs on Instagram to actually working out what it looks like to represent a blog on the platform of Instagram, as well as other social media platforms. Additionally, I've also had experience in writing blog posts, and that center around the fashionista persona because this is the one that I most identify with. So for example, I recently wrote a blog post all about the top 5 spring fashion trends for 2017. So this unique experience has allowed me to understand where these fashion bloggers get their inspiration from because I myself have had to come up with relevant and interesting content in this industry. As you can see from these screenshots from accounts that I follow, these are fashion bloggers, there is a specific aesthetic that these bloggers have. These photos are bright, they're crisp, they're clear, they have lots of whites, lots of feminine girly touches with pinks and flowers, and a lot of neutral colors. These photos almost have an airy feel. So let's keep in mind that not every single fashion blogger has this exact aesthetic because they'll vary based on the style that they wish to represent. However, I do think that it's interesting that most fashion bloggers tend to stick within these parameters when they post on Instagram. If you are a fashion blogger on Instagram, this is your aesthetic. So let's define exactly what I mean when I say the buzzword of aesthetics for this presentation. If you want to look up to the slide, I have 2 definitions going for us. We have the Google definition, which is a set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artistic movement. So this is just basically for the word aesthetics in general. It's not pertaining to social media, but rather how the word has been used throughout time. And then Urban Dictionary defines it as a combination of things that are pleasing to look at. So this one is definitely more narrowly focused on aesthetics as it pertains to social media. So I thought that it was incredibly relevant to add the Urban Dictionary definition of aesthetics because, let's be honest, this word has almost become like a cliche in our generation. I can't even tell you how many conversations I've had where people say, leave comments on Instagram photos, or even just in person, they'll say like, that aesthetic though, or like, your aesthetic is goals. Like, I'm sure you guys have heard those conversations as well. And so it's super relevant and something that every Instagrammer, regardless of if you're a brand or not, talks about. So in essence, every online platform, not just Instagram or social media, has an aesthetic in general. For me, I wanted to carefully handcraft my e-portfolio as well as my Instagram account to reflect my personal brand. So across these platforms, you can see a thread of consistency in branding. I intentionally wanted to communicate to others who I am, and I couldn't do this if every single online platform that I was present on had a different aesthetic. In this way, aesthetics has a powerful ability to round out a brand. It is vital for public relations professionals to understand their brand's aesthetic because of its popularity with the general public, as I said earlier. If a brand or a fashion blogger is not aware of their aesthetic, then how can they effectively represent their identity on Instagram? It becomes a slippery slope of brand unawareness, and ultimately I believe it will make you far less competitive than those who are also in this industry. On a side note, I want to ask, I wonder how many of you have heard of what's called a Finstagram. It's a recent trend in which people create secondary Instagram accounts that will allow them to post whatever picture they want regardless of its aesthetic. The word itself actually means fake Instagram. So the rise of these accounts led me to question the industry of social media as a whole and its ability to endorse authenticity. I recently conducted a study with fashion bloggers, and I just basically asked the question, okay, so you have this aesthetic that you put forward on your Instagram, but let's say you take a photo and you love it and you want to post it, but it doesn't match this aesthetic. What do? I thought it was incredibly interesting that most of them replied that they simply posted to another social media platform, this being one that's less aesthetically appealing than Instagram. Or they also replied that they posted to their Instagram story so it does not interfere with their personal aesthetic. To me, that information is truly fascinating. It raised questions for me such as, who set these aesthetic norms? And how is it that an entire industry has been trained to view Instagram in this specific way? Unfortunately, my study was not conclusive enough to draw the answers to these particular questions, but in my opinion, that's a rich field of study that could be done in the future. Now, with all this information on aesthetics under our belts, let's shift our focus to fashion bloggers' aesthetics and us as Christian people. Can we do it all? Can we identify a trend and do it authentically, sticking to our personal convictions? Aesthetic trends, by the way, pertain to far more than just fashion bloggers. This just happens to be the niche market in which I'm personally passionate about. So professionals can identify by the way that Instagram works that this platform is incredibly rooted in a community center. This platform is community. Additionally, as we discussed earlier from the screenshots of the fashion bloggers, there is a specific trend in the industry in photo editing. That's just a fact. In addition, we also know that there are relationships that are rooted in authenticity. We know this from being PR professionals studying for 4 years at Biola about authentic relationships and how we can approach them. The real question comes when we combine these three components. Can we even do it? Is it possible in the public relations industry to have these three components? In order to understand the use of social media within a Christian worldview, I believe that we must look to Scripture. Specifically, 1 Peter 4, 9 through 10, which says, "Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gifts you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms." This is key in my personal and professional view of social media platforms such as Instagram. If we are not offering others a place to display the gifts that they have received from the Lord, then why are we even a part of this online community? The purpose of social media is to connect with others. And I think that many scholars, Christian and secular, would agree on that statement. However, us as Christians, we have the unique ability to take it one step further and enter into the concept of soul hospitality. There has been a shift in the professional view of success on Instagram, and I think that this is really interesting. Professionals now not only gauge that the success of an Instagram account, professionals not only now gauge the success of Instagram account by the amount of followers or connections the brand has, but rather we now measure success by how often people are engaging with your platform in a meaningful way. Do people feel like they want to share a piece of who they are on your photo because you have extended them hospitality? I think that this verse is key to understanding how to approach a platform different than that of a non-believer. Another way we can approach this conversation through scripture is through Philippians 2, 3-4, which states, "Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others." So now that we know that our duty through social media is to bring people together in a hospitable way, in a hospitable way in which they can express their gifts, we must also keep this verse in mind when it comes to selfishness. This verse might be the most important thing when concerned to fashion bloggers' Instagram aesthetic. Fashion bloggers' Instagram are saturated with photos of themselves. In fact, their entire blog is based around their perception of what fashion is and what's trendy in their industry in their eyes. So, I don't believe that this automatically means that there's going to be selfish behavior. Of course not. But I do believe that this leaves room for the attention to be cast onto the blogger for the most of the time. So in this, I think that Christians need to be conscious of what it means to truly look out for the interest of others. This means authentically engaging with followers, replying to comments and direct messages, and being intentional about pursuing relationships. Obviously, there is no way to connect with every single person on Instagram because some fashion bloggers have thousands, if not millions of followers, and that's just impossible. However, I do think that there is a call to those in these positions to make an extra effort to reach out and connect. It's one thing to comment on your photo or to reply to a comment on your photo or even to like one of your followers' photos, but it is a completely new thing to be inspired and driven by the passion of those who follow you instead of the other way around. In a Christian worldview, this is one way to take away the selfish ambition that can set in this industry. People are more important than the clothes will ever be, bottom line. Therefore, I believe that yes, it is possible to stick to trends of this industry while maintaining a Christian worldview. I can speak with experience that it takes work. I recently crafted my entire Instagram to match my aesthetic of my online portfolio, as I spoke about earlier, and let me tell you that that was not without difficulty. Choosing between aesthetics and personal preference can be a struggle at times, but ultimately it comes down to truly believing in yourself as a brand and wanting to put forth the best you possible on this platform. I wanted to create a conversation and connection through my aesthetic. And at the same time, I want to be inspired by those in my field who present themselves in their own aesthetic. Inspiration can spark creativity that would not be present had an aesthetic not caught my eye and made me click on their profile. By keeping hospitality and selflessness in mind, we can approach the conversation with people who are inspired by our content on Instagram and create connections in an authentic way. By mixing these three components of hospitality and selflessness, passion, which for me would be fashion, and social media trends, we can get what I coin as our personal aesthetic. This model can really be used for any business or brand if we are inspired by our passions, humble in our convictions, and up to date with social media trends. Our Instagram aesthetic will not only be impressive on a professional scale, but lives can and will be affected. People matter, and Instagram aesthetics, even as lighthearted of a subject as we tend to make it at times, can have the ability to show this. Thank you so much for being a part of my conversation on Instagram aesthetic, and I would just like to open up the floor to any comments or questions that you might have. If anyone has any questions, they're welcome to ask now. Yes?
As someone who is also researching social media with you in PR research this semester, I really enjoyed your analysis, especially of Instagram, and your critical eye of what are these Finstagrams actually doing? How is this reflecting the way in which people use Instagram? I thought was really wise.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it's not something I thought of, but like most of my friends have Instagrams, and I never thought of that, and so I really enjoyed that insight.
I had never even heard of him before, like this year. And now like when I first heard about it, I was shocked. I was like, what? And it made sense because I'm in this industry, and so I know what aesthetics are, and I know personally how hard it is to keep that.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I just never thought people would go so far as to do that, but it's interesting that they did.
It's a bad connection. It's not your
The
fault.
cord is just.
The cord is dodgy.
Okay. So if it goes off, just don't worry.
Just adapt and keep going.
Okay.
And we'll
This
just listen
angle
to you.
usually does it.
It hasn't actually turned off.
And I can see an A. I don't know if that's operating. Does that look like
Do you want to start, Angel, or do you want to wait a few more minutes? Okay. Okay, feel free to begin whenever you are ready.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Angel Dawson. I know most of you, so it feels weird introducing myself, but I'm so excited to share with you all today. This topic is really close to my heart. I believe that we are a sum total of our experiences, so I think that God created us with different aspects of our lives that are intertwined. So as much as we like to compartmentalize our lives through work and friends and family, I think they overlap, even if we try for it not to. So I think that every experience, every emotion, every person that we come across, every heartbreak, every triumph, we are a product of all of these things. And so for me, as a 21-year-old who's about to graduate, I can stand here and say that I am a product of all of these experiences, and more importantly for this presentation, I am a product of all of the different lessons I've learned about leadership. And so whether that's through different family members, or my mom, or different advisors or bosses that I've gotten to work with, I can stand here and say that I'm a product of all of those lessons that I've learned. And I've even learned from people who've led well and also people who haven't led well. And those are the things that I'm also grateful for because I've learned from both spectrums. The topic of leadership has always been an interest of mine, whether that's been in the context of family dynamics or student government in high school or different positions I've had at Biola. I have always been drawn to student leadership and leadership in general. I've done this through carefully observing the leaders I've gotten to work with, or even reading about leadership in books. I think what can be a misconception of what leadership is that we often have this perfect image of what the perfect strong leader looks like. So we might think to be a leader we have to be strong and courageous and maybe outspoken or maybe a good public speaker. And so I think for me in high school, I thought I had to be fearless, and through the different experiences I had, I thought I had to fear nothing, and that was terrifying as a senior in high school. And so for a little bit of context, I was student body president in high school, and so when I got this position, I remember thinking that I couldn't mess up and I didn't have a safe place to mess up to learn from those things. The cool thing about leadership is that when you do good things and you achieve well, people can see it, but also when you make mistakes, people can also see it just as much, if not more. And so it wasn't that my experience in high school was a negative one. In fact, it was pretty life-changing. This is what instilled my desire for leadership in my life. And so it wasn't until I came to Biola and became a student leader that I experienced this safe place to grow and to mess up and to make mistakes and to grow as a leader in just like who I am. I've come to believe that this was due to the people who have invested into my life at Biola. So before I get into the nitty-gritty part of this presentation, I wanted you all to get a glimpse of how the different experiences I've had in high school and now at Biola have allowed me to become extremely passionate about higher education and leadership and student development, because I'm a product of what it looks like for faculty and staff and parents and family members to pour into you, even if they know it or not. And so like I said, I'm about to graduate in a few weeks, and so where does that leave me as a young woman who aspires to be a leader someday? Which leads me to my topic, which is women in Christian higher education leadership. Women in leadership have, this has become an increasingly controversial and research topic in the last few decades, I would say. In the past election, we witnessed the first female candidate to run for the highest office of presidency, and so although Senator Hillary Clinton did not win the election, I think this conversation of women in authority has increased, whether that's in the church, whether that's in government, or in this case in higher ed positions. From multiple studies and observations, there tends to be a worldwide assumption that women in leadership, specifically in Christian higher ed, face difficulty achieving positions of authority or leadership in that spectrum. And if they do receive that position, they often receive a lower salary than if they were a male. The authors of Women in Leadership, The Future of Christian Higher Education, explain the following. They noted that although the numbers of women attaining degrees had increased, the women now earning the majority of degrees across all levels, little has changed in the representation of pay of women and leaders in higher ed. They continue to discuss that women were only 10% of full-time professors, 26% of university presidents, and women accounted for less than 30% of all college and board members. So prior to this presentation, I conducted a bit of my own research, just on this topic alone to get kind of like what the root of this issue was. And so I read into mission statements of higher ed institutions, I studied leadership styles of women all across the board, and then I studied the significance of the degree when it comes to attaining positions. So what does having your master's look like, or having your PhD in regards to getting a job? So while exploring the importance of mission statements at these institutions, I came across a study that claimed mission statements reach into people's hearts and souls and motivate them to collaborate toward a cause that provides them with the opportunity to make a difference in the world. So this study focused on the mission statement aspect of Christian higher ed. How does the wording and the structure of a mission statement influence the foundational structure of an institution? If Christian higher ed institutions reformatted their mission statements, would that be more inclusive of all men and all women? And would that affect the experiences of those women leaders? And then we have to ask ourselves, if the mission statements of these institutions do not reflect the desire to include all men and to include all women, is this a question of theology, or is it just something that was simply overlooked? So I came across another study that dived into the significance of a degree. So with the comparison between educational levels and degrees, so like I said, master's, PhD level, it was noted that even with a woman advancing her education, she will still come opposed to certain barriers. So the authors of the study brought up a common scenario that happens today. If a man and a woman had completed the same amount of education, received their degree, and then went to go apply for the same job in higher ed, the man would often get the position. So what does it look like for young females to pursue a career towards leadership at any capacity, let alone at a place like Biola and other Christian higher ed institutions? Do the same barriers exist for women aspiring to be leaders today that they did decades ago? The involvement of both male and female leaders in the making of decisions is crucial, especially in our day of age. So in this presentation, I'm not saying that women leaders are more important than men at all. I think I've just come to believe that we need both. We need both men and women to make these crucial decisions. And so women in leadership at Biola, like Dr. Deb Taylor and Carrie Stockton, they've climbed a ladder and have experienced barriers that no other man has probably faced on this campus. The very fact alone that Dr. Deb Taylor is in her role of provost and senior vice president is a huge accomplishment for Biola. 3 or 4 years ago, this would have never happened. So that's really exciting for Biola. Biola has made quite a few steps in the last decade in order to create that safe and more inclusive environment for everybody. Biola is also in the season of engaging in this conversation, which has been so interesting studying this topic this semester. So I think as an institution, we're finally asking ourselves the questions in regards to women in leadership. From interviews and research that I've conducted on my own, I've seen women at Biola in these positions describe the gender climate as hopeful. And so we are in a trajectory of moving forward because we were talking about it, but we need to see if we're actually making change. And so something to note here is when some people say the gender climate here is hopeful, some other women describe that same thing as injustice or offensive or sometimes hurtful. And so that's what we really need to pay attention to because each experience differs from the other. As a young professional, to prepare to get into roles that not only pertain to my interest in PR, but also my passion for Christian higher ed, where do I fit into all of this? Should I even be pursuing a career that kind of has all odds against me? I'm young, I'm a woman, and I'm an ethnic minority. So I've had to ask myself the question, will I ever be a leader someday? A couple of months ago, I attended the 2nd annual conference for women in Christian higher ed leadership, and that was really cool because it was held here at Biola's campus. And this is where 600 leaders from CCCU institutions, so that's the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, 600 men and women gathered at this conference to engage in this conversation, just to kind of scope out how the climate has been this year. You wouldn't believe, but all odds were sort of against me going to this conference for different reasons, but some reason I found myself sitting in the first session in the first row crying when the light bulb kind of went off for me, because I think I was facing all these fears that were in my mind. And Dr. Kim Danu, who she's the vice president of APU, she spoke on the vital importance of incorporating leadership and courage, and how that as any leader and any woman, there takes a certain amount of courage to overcome the barriers that will be thrown at you. So Dr. Danu ended her talk by saying, if it doesn't scare you, then you wouldn't have to have courage. And courage is what builds a great leader, hence the tears. This semester has been a journey in discovering what I really am passionate about. I know that the Lord has designed me to work with people. According to StrengthsFinder, one of my top 5 strengths is empathy. So let me tell you, this has been the best thing, but also one of the hardest things, because I feel so deeply with other people. And so I love sitting with people where they're at in the highs and the lows. But as you can imagine, with an empathy meter so sensitive as mine, it can get exhausting sometimes. But still, I think the Lord has put that desire in my heart to just sit with people and be a leader and be a change agent. And so for me, I've had to ask myself, how do I do this and where do I do this? And I think when we really think about passion and calling, we are so afraid, at least I am. I'm afraid that I'm not going to complete God's will, or that I'm going to screw it all up by deciding whether or not to go to grad school or whether or not to take the job. And so the question we are always asking ourselves is this what you have for me, Lord? When I came into Biola as a freshman, I came in undeclared. So I enjoyed taking all my general ed classes, and then up until my sophomore year, this is where I found my knack for public relations, just because my life is very much fueled by the relationships around me. My passion for working with people in an administrative setting, yet relational setting, has been grown through the different leadership positions I've had at Biola. Working at Biola as a student leader has very much changed my life. Through the different conversations I've been invited to be a part of, or just different decision-making processes that I've gotten to sit in on, or even getting to hire and lead my own staff this year has been life-changing. I've learned so much about Biola and about higher ed, and also as myself as a leader and a child of God. So through different experiences as a student leader, I have been mentored and poured into by countless amount of staff and faculty. Whether that has been through office hours, with my professors, or meetings with my SHV advisor for work, or even getting to work with higher up administrators like Dr. Taylor or Andrea Stevens has been so awesome. And even more on a personal level, I got to ask one of my professors' wives to be one of my spiritual mentors, which has been awesome. And so I've just been changed by their wisdom and their counsel on all spectrums. So taking my experiences as a student leader at Biola and the ways I've been poured into by the administrators and professors and people I've interacted with, and then taking my love for leadership and change, I am so looking forward to pursuing a career in higher education. The plan right now is to go into grad school for my Master's of Science in Higher Education Leadership and Student Development. And so this is so that one day I can counsel and I can encourage and I can pour into the student leaders, just as I was poured into as a student leader here. These last 4 years in student leadership has been so formative for me and so eye-opening, and I truly believe that this is because people here at Biola have fought for my personhood. They fought for student leadership. They have allowed me to develop into the person I am today. They've mentored me, and I think most importantly, they created a safe space for me to make mistakes and to fail, but also have encouraged me to challenge myself. I no longer picture the perfect leader as someone who has to be fearless in all areas of life. And I think the best leaders are created when someone does come alongside them and allows them to make mistakes and fail, and then pushes them to challenge themselves and improve as an overall person and a leader and a child of God. So I've been fortunate enough to have many good and strong leaders pour into a developing leader, and as a result, I'm forever changed. I'm forever grateful. I want to end with this quote by Chris Hadfield. He said, "Ultimately, leadership is not about glorious crowning acts. It's about keeping your team focused on a goal and motivated to do their best to achieve it, especially when the stakes are high and the consequences really matter." This is my favorite part. "It is about laying the groundwork for others' success and then standing back and letting them shine. And so in so many ways, the leaders here at Biola have laid the groundwork and then stood back and let me shine. So a few years from now, my dream would look a lot like being one of those leaders that lays the groundwork for students to succeed, that pours into students and mentors them and encourages them to make mistakes and to fail, and then standing back and letting them shine. That concludes, I don't know why I'm getting so emotional. That concludes my time. Thank you guys so much. If you guys have any questions, I'd love to answer. But if not, thank you for listening.